Hi, I'm just doing my video as part of my own personal contribution to campaigning for a Labour government on the 12th of December, and this has appeared on my Twitter feed, which has been published in The Guardian by Mr Monbiot, and I think it's very important, and so I'm just adding to the publicity for what he's explaining here, and to alert people to this and other campaigns, media campaigns against Corbyn that are just promoting absolute lies. So George Monbiot asks here, why do I have to break an embargo in order to expose press lies about Labour? We've taken on the Mail on Sunday and won, but the newspaper regulator won't correct the story till after the election, and so that's why I've also decided to cover this story for my contribution to the campaign for a Labour government. So, as he explains here, one of the golden rules of journalism is that you don't break an embargo, a block on publication until a certain date. For the first time in my career, I'm breaking one now. The moral case for doing so outweighs the moral case for respecting it. 5 months. For 5 months, the press regulator IPSO, which was set up by British newspapers, has been considering a complaint that could play a role in this election. It concerns an outrageous lie about the Labour Party, first published by the Mail on Sunday and repeated many times by other newspapers and the Conservative Party. 2 weeks ago, IPSO ruled against the paper and imposed a major sanction. The Mail on Sunday was asked for a review of the decision, delaying its publication. The review upheld the decision, but still it hasn't been published. So, as far as voters are concerned, the lie stands. A key claim used to tip the balance against Labour remains uncorrected. I owe more to the truth than I do to the embargo. Last summer, I co-published a report to the Labour Party titled Land for the Many. It took many months of work, drawing on a vast range of sources and expertise to produce radical but realistic ideas for changing the way we use our most important resource. We worked hard to make our arguments as watertight as possible. We needn't have bothered because our opponents scarcely addressed them. The storm of lies about our report in the billionaire press gave me an idea of what it must be like to be a Labour politician. Pushing back against them all would be a full-time job for several people. But we decided to confront one of them in the hope it might illuminate the others. The Mail on Sunday turned our independent report for the Labour Party into bombshell plans being drawn up by Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, then told an outright lie about what it contained. We proposed, the Daily Mail said, to scrap the capital gains tax exemption on main homes. At the moment, if you sell the house or flat in which you live, you don't pay capital gains on the profit you might make. We examined the case for changing this, explained the arguments for and against, and then clearly and specifically rejected the idea. But who cares if you can terrify the living daylights out of your readership, convincing them that Corbyn is the spawn of Satan? As if to suggest such lies are organised within the Conservative Party, the article quoted Boris Johnson, who claimed this mad tax on all your houses would cripple every Brit who owns or wants to own their own home. The lie was picked up on social media by other senior Conservatives and has been used repeatedly in the party's campaign materials, websites and Facebook pages. It was reproduced by most of the other billionaire newspapers, and we'll just have a look at one of these campaign sites, there you go. Spending plans, a homes tax, a movers tax. Okay. So, just last week, an article by Tom Newton-Dunn in The Sun claimed that Labour was considering a movers tax, scrapping the capital gains tax exemption on main homes. This false claim has now been deeply implanted in people's minds. Labour is coming for your home. One of the authors of our report, Anna Powell-Smith, made a complaint to Ipso. Had she not been determined, she might have been defeated by a process that seems designed to deter. For much of the 5 months this has taken to resolve, the newspaper, with its vastly greater resources, was allowed to bombard her with Johnsonian arguments or offer tiny clarifications on a remote page. It was time-consuming and intimidating. Most people are likely to have given up or accepted a meaningless concession. Watching this process, I came to the conclusion that Ipso is not fit for purpose. And it certainly isn't. From my own personal experience, it is not fit for purpose. Even so, it eventually bowed to the inevitable. This is a rare victory against the billionaire press, but it would count for nothing if buried until the election is over. Anyone who wants a better world finds themselves at war with the exceedingly rich people who own the media and the editors and journalists they employ. The pen might be mightier than the sword, but the wallet is mightier than the pen. News is the propaganda of the oligarch. Are we prepared to allow the proprietors of the newspapers, many of whom live offshore, to determine the course of our politics? The rewards for political lying are massive. They include winning referendums and elections. The penalties are either non-existent or tiny. If the Conservative Party is sanctioned by the Electoral Commission for any of its outrageous lying and cheating, it might, long after the election, have to pay the maximum fine of £20,000, which a friendly billionaire could doubtless pull out of his back pocket. If elections are won by lies, we find ourselves governed by liars. They won't hesitate to ramp up their deceptions when in office. One focus is likely to be voter suppression. Already the Conservatives, learning from Republican tricks in the US, have floated the idea that people must bring photo ID to the polling booths. They know that 3.5 million people, few of whom are likely to vote Conservative, don't possess it. The old adage is, cheats never prosper, the truth will out, virtue always triumphs, are themselves falsehoods. But, futile as it often seems, one-sided as the war between truth and falsehood always is, we must fight the tide of lies. Don't let them win this week. So, now you understand why I've chosen for my contribution to Labour election campaign this particular story, because it just exposes what we are up against and the kind of lies that people so commonly believe because they've read it in The Sun. And it is a bit like Chinese whispers. Somebody puts something out there and the next minute it's being quoted all over the place and it becomes common knowledge when actually it is an absolute lie. And this is the kind of stuff that narcissists do. And we do, unfortunately, have far too many narcissists in government office at the moment in Britain. And they are narcissists precisely because they believe they have a right to power just by force of their what they consider their birthright, to be born into wealth and privilege. But also narcissists in the sense that they are actually incompetent, and that's why they depend on lies and smears against their political opponents, because actually, you know, what their plans are criminal. And once you hold them up to any kind of scrutiny, you find, oh, people are going to die, people are going to become destitute, people are going to lose their jobs, there's going to be no true democratic process anymore in Britain, and all these kind of things. So they have to deflect and distract and lie, because really what they have, the plans that Johnson has for Britain are criminal. They are criminal. And again, I'll leave my intel for Brexit link underneath this. You know, check the level of crime and criminality. I mean, nobody, unless you were a billionaire, and actually you'd have to even be a heartless billionaire to knowingly vote for these people, you know, then the Tories have got nothing for anybody in Britain, and neither have the Lib Dems, who are, let's face it, clones. They're basically a paler shade of Tory, but they will support the Tories every step of the way, and we've witnessed it. We've witnessed the Lib Dems blatantly lie to the public that they would not allow tuition fees, and then what do? They support tuition fees. I mean, you really couldn't make this stuff up. And so for this election, I would ask people that, look, no matter how you voted before in the past, no matter what previous what previous election results were in your particular area, forget the tactics, just vote Labour, because you're voting for humanity. And it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, you will benefit in so many ways. In so many ways. That, you know, I would even go so far as to say that however much you might be spending extra in taxes, the very wealthy among British people, you will actually be saving that same amount, if not more, just by the fact that the workforce themselves are now a lot more independent, and there's a lot more cash flowing through society. Labour will be a huge boost to independently owned British businesses. And people don't talk about that. You know, we hear a lot about the poor and the people struggling at food banks and the struggling of the NHS, which are all very important things to take into account. But, you know, there's not been much focus on the pensioners that lost their pensions, or on the people who've lost their trust funds, or the people who've lost their businesses. You see, because they've just been gone in Britain as they've been taken over by global corporations. And people think, you know, Labour is communist, anti-capitalist. Corbyn is not anti-capitalist. What we're talking about here, that Labour has always stood for in Britain, is democratic socio-capitalism. It's democratic socio-capitalism. It isn't that we're against capitalism. We're not against independently owned businesses. But what we stand for are for the people, to defend them from the global corporate interests that are against the human. They're anti-human rights, they're anti-workers' rights, they're anti-environmental protection laws, they're anti-food and safety regulations, and they are anti a nationalised health service. And they're anti-free education. Basically, the only thing they're for is their self-given right to profit off our labour, our lives, our produce and our resources that do belong to everybody. And it just isn't fair that they've been able to become billionaires and store how much money, and then buy politicians and buy our newspaper and buy our journalists and buy the BBC. You know, where did this money come from? It didn't come out of thin air. It comes from the people that they're oppressing, that they're pressing down on and squeezing them literally draining the blood out of society, because money does equate to people's life blood. People die without it. People suffer. And our nation has been suffering since it's been robbed of over £1 trillion. And the people have been persecuted by this economic attack that has inflicted terrorism against the British people. I've reading it repeatedly on the internet that people are terrified. That's the exact quote. Are terrified of Johnson getting back in, of another Tory government. They're terrified. They dread it. And yet, at the same time, I'm reading that the rich Tory, average Tory voters of Britain are terrified of a Corbyn government. But what's Corbyn going to do to them? Apart from charge the richest among them extra taxes. What, they're terrified that he's going to uphold human rights, that he's not going to scrap them. They're terrified he's going to give the public another referendum on Brexit. They're terrified that he's going to educate the public and provide homes for them and a decent wage. They're terrified that he's going to protect the environment and actually do whatever he can in Britain to address climate change. Are they terrified that he's going to provide nursery places to more children? That he's going to build social housing for people? Are these things to be terrified of? Are any of them going to be made destitute? No. No, they're not. Oh, all right, there might be a few £1,000 out of profit, perhaps even more, depending on how rich they are. Perhaps no longer will they be able to store their billions. I mean, billions. Do people even know what £1 billion looks like? It's more than most people could ever even dream of earning in their whole of their working lives. It's absolutely outrageous, and this is outrageous. And this story alone really is enough to already question this general election, the legality of it. That when we think that the Mail on Sunday, really, I think it needs to be scrapped as a publication. It needs to be banned, because for spreading a malicious lie like that, informing people that all homeowners of Britain that, oh, if you sell your house, you know, you're going to have to pay extra tax because it's going to be counted as unearned income, a moving tax. That is absolutely outrageous. And the fact that Ipso has said it doesn't have to, the Mail doesn't have to rectify that until after the election. So in other words, we'll let the lie stand until people have voted on the strength of it. That is really outrageous. And as I say, I've had dealings with Ipso, and I can't really go into it right now, but I will tell you now, it was over very, very serious errors of the press and in relation to children's rights to justice. And it, you know, as I say, it was very, very serious, and we had them banged to rights. I mean, every single one of the press code of ethics, I think there was only one that they hadn't broken. Various newspapers, the Telegraph, the Mail, there was only one of the code of ethics that hadn't been broken in this whole, in our complaint. And there was, you know, there really was no way that it was indefensible in face of the evidence that we presented to Ipso, and they refused to uphold our complaint. and I was absolutely disgusted and actually deeply depressed for quite a few months afterwards, because it is a big thing to report something to IPSO and have to get all the evidence together and deal with this person and that person. First of all, contacting the newspapers themselves, and then going to IPSO, and then being basically casually brushed aside, and total ignorance of the evidence. And here we go again, and now something equally as serious as a general election. And so there you go. I would like to inform you here on behalf of George Monbiot, I'll leave you the link to his article, that Labour will not be imposing a moving tax. Okay, there will be no capital gains tax when you sell your home. That is not going to happen. That is a lie. Okay, that's a lie that was written by the Mail on Sunday. It didn't even come from Corbyn. This discussion about the tax, a possible tax on homes when they're being sold, it came actually from George Monbiot, who published a report and gave it to the Labour Party titled Land for the Many. So this whole thing didn't even come from Jeremy Corbyn or Labour. It came from George Monbiot and others. Okay? And then suddenly it's attributed directly to Labour, and suddenly they're lying to people about it. They're basically saying that you will have to pay capital gains tax when you move. And George Monbiot here is explaining it was a lie. Even IPSO had upheld it as a lie. But IPSO have given them the option to carry on with that lie until after the election. So although IPSO have been forced to acknowledge that yes, the Mail did tell a lie, and this lie has been exploited now and used to misinform and disinform the public, nonetheless, it isn't an urgent thing now that needs rectifying. The British public don't need to be informed by the same manner of headlines that this was a lie. And as George Monbiot says here, you know, a £20,000 fine for lies that have got you into number 10. I'm sorry, that is absolutely outrageous, and it's not good enough. It is not good enough. We need some serious changes in the law and about these freedoms of the press. You know, freedom of the press, yes, but not freedom to print lies. That, you know, that is not free speech, printing outright lies. And especially so serious, that impacts so many people, and just before a GE. It is outrageous, and let that be evidence to the British people in influencing your vote. Ask yourself, why should you vote for liars, fraudsters and deceivers? Why should you vote for anybody that lies to you? Because if people have really got something good to offer, and they're genuine and they have integrity, why would they need to lie to you? Why would Boris Johnson need to lie? Why would all these newspapers be standing with him and even creating lies on his behalf to help him get into power? We just can't do it. We cannot build our children's future on liars, and neither on their complicits, the Lib Dems. So please, people, I ask you to vote Labour.